For decades, Africa has exported crude oil to the world, only to buy it back as refined fuel, at a premium. The continent has watched billions of dollars leave its shores every single month, paying European refineries to do what Africa, for the most part, could not do for itself. But something is changing. Something significant. And the story unfolding right now between Ghana and Nigeria's Dangote Petroleum Refinery might just be the clearest sign yet that the era of Africa's energy dependence is beginning to crack. Before we begin, kindly subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Ghana is one of West Africa's more stable economies. It exports oil. It has 2 refineries. It even has a small modular facility. But here's the hard truth. Those refineries combined produce only around 5,000 to 6,000 barrels of refined fuel per day. That sounds like a lot until you realize that in Nigerian terms, that volume is barely a rounding error. It is nowhere near enough to meet Ghana's domestic demand for petrol, diesel, or aviation fuel. So for years, Ghana has filled that gap the only way it could, by importing refined petroleum products from Europe, primarily from Rotterdam. And that arrangement has been bleeding the country dry, costing an estimated $400 million every single month. $400 million. Every month. Gone to Europe for fuel that came from African oil in the first place. Now, in February 2026, Ghana has made a formal and public commitment to change that equation. At the Nigerian International Energy Summit held in Abuja from February 2nd to 5th, the Chief Executive Officer of Ghana's National Petroleum Authority, Godwin Kudzo Tameklo, stood before regional leaders and declared that Ghana is actively working to import refined petroleum products directly from Nigeria's Dangote Petroleum Refinery. He confirmed that extensive engagements are already underway with Alhaji Aliko Dangote himself, and that a commercial relationship between Ghana and the refinery is being structured. His words were direct. Given the geographic proximity between Ghana and Nigeria, increased reliance on Nigerian refined products will meaningfully reduce the cost of fuel delivered into Ghana. Less shipping time. Lower freight charges. No transatlantic logistics. And critically, no dollars hemorrhaging to Rotterdam every 30 days. But to understand why this matters so deeply, we need to talk about what the Dangote Refinery actually is. Located in Lekki on the outskirts of Lagos, the Dangote Petroleum Refinery is not just Africa's largest refinery. It is currently the largest single-train refinery on the entire planet. It was built at a cost of $20 billion, making it one of the most ambitious private industrial projects in African history. Its installed capacity stands at 650,000 barrels per day, a figure so large that Nigeria itself only needs roughly 50% of that output to meet 100% of its own domestic fuel demand. The other half is available for export. And with a planned expansion already in motion targeting 700,000 barrels per day by the end of 2025, and Aliko Dangote's stated ambition to eventually double capacity to 1.4 million barrels per day, the refinery is positioning itself not just as Nigeria's fuel solution, but as Africa's. As of January 2026, the refinery is operating at approximately 85% of its installed capacity. In that same month, it achieved a historic milestone. For the first time in a 13-month reporting window, domestic production from Dangote overtook fuel imports in Nigeria. The refinery now supplies approximately 62% of Nigeria's daily petrol needs, up from virtually zero just a couple of years ago. It is producing over 40 million liters of premium motor spirit per day, and its CEO has stated the facility can now push beyond 50 million liters daily. That is a seismic shift in a country that, not long ago, imported nearly every drop of petrol it consumed. So what does this mean for Ghana specifically? First and most immediately, cost. Ghana has been paying European prices for fuel, which means European freight rates, European refinery margins and dollar-denominated contracts in a global market that Nigeria, as an OPEC producer, is far better positioned to supply at competitive rates. By sourcing from Dangote, Ghana eliminates the transatlantic shipping leg entirely. Freight savings alone would be substantial. And because the refinery is priced in a regional context rather than a global commodity exchange, Ghana stands to access products at rates that better reflect West African market conditions. Second, supply stability. Ghana's dependence on European imports has made it vulnerable to global price shocks, currency volatility, and logistics disruptions. The COVID pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, and global oil market fluctuations have all sent shockwaves through Ghana's fuel supply chain. Sourcing closer to home from a refinery with surplus capacity creates a more resilient and predictable supply line. Third, currency dynamics. Every dollar Ghana spends importing fuel from Europe is a dollar leaving the continent. Intra-African trade, by contrast, keeps more of that financial exchange within the region, potentially reducing pressure on Ghana's foreign exchange reserves and easing some of the currency depreciation strain that has hurt ordinary Ghanaians in recent years. The NPA's Tameklo made an important point worth noting. He referenced Ghana's experience with fuel subsidy reform, pointing out that in 2015, when the government couldn't pay subsidies on time, fuel stations were collapsing across the country. Ghana responded by fully deregulating fuel pricing and allowing market forces to operate, and that decision ultimately helped build a more resilient downstream sector. It is a model he believes Ghana can now deepen through smarter regional sourcing, ensuring that price stability comes not from subsidies or artificial controls, but from more efficient supply chains. Now let's turn to what this means for Nigeria. For Nigeria, the Ghana deal, and the broader regional demand it represents, is enormously validating. Nigeria's oil sector has been troubled for years. Its 3 state-owned refineries in Port Harcourt, Warri, and Kaduna are all non-operational. The government spent $18 billion on their maintenance over 2 decades with nothing to show for it. Nigeria was, absurdly, a major crude oil exporter that imported virtually all its refined petroleum. The Dangote Refinery changed that narrative, and now Nigeria is on the cusp of full domestic energy self-sufficiency. But Ghana's interest signals something even bigger, that Nigeria can now become a net fuel exporter. An energy hub for West Africa. A supplier to the continent rather than a consumer of European refining capacity. Tameklo himself put it plainly, Nigeria has positioned itself as the energy hub of Africa, and that position should be strengthened through sound regulation and regional cooperation. Economically, this is transformative for Nigeria. The Dangote Refinery is already saving Nigeria an estimated 10 billion naira annually in import costs, according to Dangote Industries Limited. As export volumes grow, to Ghana and eventually to other neighboring markets, those economic benefits multiply. Foreign exchange inflows from fuel exports strengthen the naira. Refinery employment and the downstream supply chain create jobs. And for Aliko Dangote, whose refinery has been in a very public battle with fuel importers and even clashed with Nigeria's downstream regulator over import licenses, securing regional export markets is both commercially vital and strategically decisive. There is also a pricing dimension worth examining. As of early February 2026, there is still a competitive tension within Nigeria itself. Imported petrol was landing at approximately 721 naira per liter, while the Dangote Refinery's gantry price was around 799 naira. The refinery recently cut its price by 27 naira per liter in response to competition, and analysts expect further price adjustments as production ramps up and economies of scale kick in. For regional exports like Ghana, pricing will need to be competitive against both European imports and other potential suppliers. But the structural advantages of proximity, surplus capacity, and the political will on both sides make a deal not just likely, but, at this point, almost inevitable. Zooming out further, this partnership between Ghana and Nigeria sits within a much larger continental conversation. Aliko Dangote has been one of the most vocal critics of Africa's energy dependence, famously telling the Africa CEO Forum that the continent has the capacity to refine its own fuel, and that the billions spent on European imports represent an inexcusable economic self-inflicted wound. His refinery was always designed with that argument in mind. It was built big enough and priced strategically enough to serve Africa, not just Nigeria. And now Ghana is saying, we hear that argument and we're in. If Ghana follows through on this commitment, and if the commercial framework between Accra and Dangote materializes into actual supply agreements, it could serve as a template for other African nations. Togo, Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Senegal, all of these countries face similar refining capacity constraints. All of them import fuel from outside Africa. All of them could, in theory, pivot to Nigeria as a regional supplier. The combined West African petroleum import market runs into the billions of dollars monthly. Capturing even a portion of that market would cement Nigeria's position as Africa's energy anchor. But let's be honest about the challenges too. The Dangote Refinery has had its own headaches, most notably, a persistent struggle to secure adequate crude feedstock from the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, which has committed much of its output to service existing financial obligations. The refinery has had to import crude from the US and the Middle East to keep running. That is a paradox. Africa's largest refinery sitting in Nigeria buying crude from America. Until domestic crude supply is reliably secured, the refinery's export ambitions will remain somewhat fragile. There is also the question of infrastructure, pipelines, port logistics, storage facilities, all of which must be scaled to accommodate regional trade. And there are currency and payment framework questions that come with cross-border fuel trade in a region where dollar availability varies significantly. Still, the direction of travel is clear. Ghana's announcement is not a casual diplomatic courtesy. It is a commercial intent backed by formal discussions at the highest levels of both countries' energy sectors. It reflects a recognition, growing across Africa, that the continent must leverage its own resources for its own development, and stop paying external partners to process what Africa produces. The Dangote Refinery was called a gamble when it was conceived. $20 billion. In Nigeria. On oil. In an era of energy transition. Critics questioned whether it would ever operate, whether it could compete, whether Africa's dysfunction would swallow it whole. But today, in February 2026, it is capturing 62% of Nigeria's fuel market and fielding export inquiries from neighboring countries. Ghana, one of West Africa's most economically managed nations, is knocking on its door. That is not a gamble anymore. That is a pivot point. For Ghana, it means cheaper fuel, a stronger currency, and a more resilient energy supply chain. For Nigeria, it means foreign exchange, regional influence, and the economic validation of its biggest ever private industrial investment. For West Africa, it means a new chapter, one where the continent's energy story is written not in Rotterdam or Houston but in Lagos. This is what African economic integration looks like when it actually works.